Vanachari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari
Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Jaya Radha Kunja Bihari Radha Kunja Radhe
Jaya Radha Kunja Bihari Radha Kunja Bihari
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manodishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuktapalakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vikantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhamritamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatkaleshakarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, welcome to our Friday evening study. The weather is getting cooler. It is now September. But we are persevering, little tapasya, in the name of making some progress in devotional life. It's not so easy. But Srila Prabhupada has made it very reachable for all of us with his very sweet and simple explanations. Really, one of Srila Prabhupada's true gifts to us is that he has an extraordinary ability to take very complex and sometimes subtle and even esoteric topics that are very important to understand and make them digestible for us. He makes it very relatable. He brings out very vivid examples and analogies and metaphors that allow us to relate to these topics and make it so accessible. I was discussing with my father, we were reading some of our, books in our Gaudiya Vaishnava books. But when you become accustomed to reading Srila Prabhupada's books, the purport sometimes we see in some other book are very difficult to understand. Very difficult to pull out the essence. And it makes you appreciate how perfect Srila Prabhupada has presented this. And sometimes we become, with frequency of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, we sometimes forget to appreciate how great they are. And in this section of Bhagavad Gita, particularly this chapter, it's very technical. It carries a lot of technical terms and topics, and sometimes in that, we can get lost. But again, Srila Prabhupada in his purports make these technical topics very accessible. And this chapter has some longer purports. If we look at it, there's just some lengthy purports to try to explain some of these terms. So we'll read them. So we're reading this chapter 13, titled Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. So I think we finished the first two verses last time. Is that right? We'll always remember.
First two verses?
13.3. Right? Okay. So let's read 13.3. So I think this is a long purport, so maybe we'll read one or two paragraphs and then discuss, and then read a couple more paragraphs and discuss, just to keep it fresh with what Srila Prabhupada is saying while we discuss it. That's okay with everyone. So someone would like to start us off?
Can I read the translation or?
Yeah.
O scion of Bharata, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. While discussing the subject of the body and the knower of the body, the soul and the super soul, we shall find three different topics of studying the Lord, the living entity and matter. In every field of activities, in every body, there are two souls, the individual soul and the super soul. Because the super soul is the plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna says, I am also the knower, but I am not the individual knower of the body. I am the super knower. I am present in every body as the Paramatma or super soul. Someone else wants to?
One who studies the subject matter of the field of activity and the knower of the field very minutely in terms of his Bhagavad Gita can attain to knowledge. The Lord says, I am the knower of the field of activities in every individual body. The individual may be the knower of his own body, but he is not in knowledge of other bodies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present as the super soul in all bodies, knows everything about all bodies. He knows all the different bodies of all the various species of life. A citizen may know everything about his patch of land, but the king knows not only the palace, but all the properties possessed by the individual citizens. Similarly, one may be the proprietor of the body individually, but the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of all bodies. The king is the original proprietor of the kingdom, and the citizen is a secondary proprietor. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is the supreme proprietor of all bodies.
So let's pause here for a second. We'll just discuss these first couple paragraphs so that we can understand here. So if we remember, Arjuna asked Krishna to explain 6 terms, and he wanted to know about Prakriti, which is nature. He wanted to know about Purusha, which is the enjoyer. He wanted to know about Kshetra, the field, Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, this Jnanam, knowledge, and Jnaya, the object of knowledge. So these 6 terms Krishna is explaining. So in the second verse that we read last week, Krishna began to explain the body and the knower. And he said, this body, O son of Kunti, is called the field. And one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. So last week, we established that the body is compared to a field. Why is it compared to a field? It seems a little peculiar, maybe, at first blush. But why is the body compared to a field?
So we have to cultivate it.
Cultivate Cultivate it, yes. And what do we cultivate from a field?
Fruits, food.
Different, outcomes, right? What do we cultivate from this body?
Outcomes.
Different outcomes. It's a plane from which we can experience different things. So it's called a kshetra. But when the farmer walks out of his house or her house, they don't think, I am the field. They say, this is my field. Right? There's a distinction between the cultivator of the field and the field itself. There's a distinction. So Krishna is saying that one should know that there's a body and then there's a knower of the body. And who is that knower of the body that Krishna explained last week? Not this week yet. Who is the knower of the body?
The jiva.
The jiva. Right? So that I am spirit soul. So this takes us all the way back to chapter 2. So Krishna has already explained the distinction between body and soul. But as we talked about last week, it's sometimes just it's difficult for us to feel that this body, I'm just a resident within this body. But just as it's very clear for the farmer to know I am not the field, one in knowledge knows that they are not this body. So very, again, a clear topic we've discussed. But now what does Krishna say in this verse? What does he add to what he said in the last verse?
I'm also the knower of all the bodies, everything.
So he says, I am also the knower of, but he has the distinction, what bodies?
All bodies.
All bodies.
All bodies. So that is the distinction. So there are two kshetragyas. The jiva is a limited knower, and then there is the ultimate knower. Right? So Prabhupada says in the beginning of this purport that there are 3 different topics that we should study. What are those 3 topics?
The Lord, the entity, and matter.
The Lord, the living entity, and matter. Now that seems relatively finite, right? 3 things? Really? You go on Google, how many things you can learn about? Unlimited. How big is Wikipedia? Gigantic. Now they're like subsets of Wikipedia, right? Right? But this knowledge, so what Krishna says here is one who knows the body and the knower of the body, that's called knowledge. That's quite, 1, succinct, and 2, very profound. Because if we think about it, beyond the Lord, the living entity, and matter, what else is there?
It encompasses all.
It's everything, right? It's all encompassing. It's everything. So this knowledge is to understand the 3 in relationship. If I know matter, I understand matter. And I may be the best of scientists. But if I don't know the living entity or the Lord, will I have any success in my knowledge ultimately? Right? So, our conventional understanding of knowledge is on the platform of what? When you go to a university, we were at a university yesterday. There were thousands and thousands of students and so many classrooms. And we were noticing this field of study, this field of study, this field of study. And we're like, oh, I didn't know this field of study exists. Maybe this is new. And now we're perplexed. And it's just one of many universities. And it all relates to what?
Matter.
Is there anything beyond matter taught at the university level? How about at the PhD level? The PhD, it all ends with matter, right? So what we conventionally ascribe to knowledge, Krishna is saying is we must go beyond. Matter will get us somewhere. But unfortunately, manipulating or adjusting matter will yield very simple or temporary results. So we must go to understand the living entity and the Lord. So if matter is matter, we know that. What is the living entity and the Supreme Lord? Of what nature are they?
Spiritual.
Now the living entity is called marginal. Right? Why is it called marginal?
Covered in our material bodies, but we're a soul inside.
Covered, but the soul inside. Yeah.
But he has, the living entity has a scope to go beyond that and understand that they are spirit souls. But then at the same time, they have a tendency to exploit and nod over the material nature. So kind of matter, and so they are kind of in the border.
Between.
Yeah, in the border kind of thing.
The border. Sometimes they associate with matter, like the conditioned soul, like most of us, encased within this body, we don't draw a distinction between the Kshetra and the Kshetrajna. Right? We don't draw a distinction between the field and the knower of the field. But one who comes to knowledge, what Krishna is saying here, one who knows about that is in knowledge, then that living entity is associating with spirit. Does anybody know what examples Srila Prabhupada and our Shastras used to describe this marginal potency of the soul?
A river.
Bank.
The river bank. The bank of a river, it is neither river nor is it really land. It's kind of in between. So the living entity kind of situates in this way. So our opportunity by hearing from Krishna on this topic and hearing from Srila Prabhupada is to associate at the higher platform, on this platform of spirit. So Prabhupada summarizes that all the different things about the soul, the super soul, the knower, all these things, it boils down to Lord, living entity, and matter. Now note, knowing just I am spirit soul and I am not this body. Right? We learned that very early on. Is that sufficient? To know I am spirit soul and I am not this body? Is that sufficient knowledge to obtain perfection of life?
No.
What else must we know about?
Supreme soul.
The Supreme Soul. Because, now one may say, why? Why is it not sufficient? So let's say, why is it not, why must we know about the Supreme Lord?
Because we're part and parcel to.
Because we have no independent existence. Our sustenance, our maintenance is being provided by the Supreme Lord. So because a living entity has this dependent nature, it must know who it's dependent upon to have full clarity. If someone is supporting me in my life, but I have no clue of who it is, I'll be perplexed. I'll be wondering, who is sending food every day? Who is sending clothing? Who is providing shelter every day? Naturally, in the material world, if someone was living in this way, they would search out those answers, would they not? Any sane person would search out, who is providing this? Well, who is providing all of us? It is the Supreme Lord. Right, so these three constitute knowledge. So we must understand these in totality, right? Okay, so now Prabhupada explains in the third paragraph we read about the difference between the soul and the super soul. So what is the difference between the soul and the super soul? Yeah.
Well, the soul is the individual Jiva, whereas the super soul is the Ishvara, which is the super soul in everything, everybody. Brahmatma is in all things.
Yeah, okay. So the super soul is present in all living entities. Every atom, Srila Prabhupada says, the super soul is present with it. Okay, what else is different about, or distinctions between the soul and the super soul? So presence, where it's located. One. What else?
Soul is a knower of his own body, as Prabhupada said, and super soul is a knower of all. Knows everything.
If I stub my toe, do you say ouch?
No,
Why not?
because it's your toe.
Because it's my toe. Right? I have consciousness of what happens to my body. When my body experiences different things, I have consciousness of it. Right? If I am hungry, do you know that I'm hungry? Maybe if I get cranky or something, or irritable, or then okay, yes, he must be hungry. And how does a baby express that they're hungry? They cry. Right? That's their mode of communicating. Why? They have to cry to mother. Because mother doesn't know. Right? Now, when we are hungry, does the super soul know? Super soul knows everything. Right? He is the supreme knower. So, the Kshetra Gyan, knowing about our body, we know something, we know ours. But Krishna, residing within our heart, knows everything. And actually, that's a very comforting, very warming understanding. Sometimes, we wonder, wow, I did this good deed, but nobody knew. But who knows? Krishna knows. Sometimes, they think I did this bad deed, but I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Children always do that, right? When playing, it wasn't me. But who knows? Krishna knows. Right? So he is the supreme knower. And what example does Prabhupada give us to help us understand this?
The king.
And how does he use it? In what context?
That the king, he knows everything that's happening in his land, or like the individual person living in the land would just know their particular thing. Like the secondary proprietor.
He's a secondary proprietor. That's a very important term. Right? So, I think I am the proprietor of this body. This is my body. To some degree, we are the proprietor. But are we the ultimate proprietor?
No.
No. Just like I may think this is my house, right? This is my plot of land. I have a deed, legal document, says it's mine. What happens if I stop paying my taxes?
What?
Bye. The city will come and say, this is my land. This is mine. I said, no, I'm the proprietor. Okay. So, we may be the proprietor, but we are relative to the ultimate proprietor. And who is that ultimate proprietor?
Krishna.
So let's read the next paragraph in this relation. Somebody wants to read the next?
Body consists.
The body consists of the senses. The Supreme Lord is Rishikesha, which means the control of the senses. He is the original controller of the senses, just as the king is the original controller of all the activities of the state. The citizens are secondary controllers. The Lord says, I am also the knower. This means that he is a super knower. The individual soul knows only his particular body. In the Vedic literature, it is stated as follows.
So you can stop there for a second, no problem. So here we see the secondary knower. So Krishna is the controller of our senses. That is a Rishikesh. But sometimes that becomes a little bit confusing to us. Wait a minute. Aren't I controlling the senses? I know where I look. I know what I hear. I know what I taste. So am I not the controller of the senses? I am the secondary controller. Just like the citizen in the kingdom, he may be given a plot of land so they can control what types of crops are cultivated on this land, how the land is used. But are they the absolute controller of that piece of land? They're given the land for a certain purpose. So similarly, we are given this body and we have the opportunity to utilize it. But ultimately, we are under the control of Krishna. Just like our senses. If I want to see something, do I really have full control of my sight? We don't think about this, but somebody has given us these two eyeballs that allows us to gaze upon something, see it, understand it, contextualize it, and perceive it. But are we doing any of that activity? That is happening by the function of this body. Right? But who has made it? Krishna has arranged the body to function in this way. Just like if my computer stops working, what do? I go to the manufacturer and say, your computer doesn't work. I know I am not that independent operator of this computer. I may be able to punch some keys, and I'm assuming I'm not some computer tech person, so we'll go with the example. I'm just the limited operator of this computer. But the manufacturer, they are the ultimate. Right? So that's in the same way, when Krishna says, we call him Rishikesh, a controller of the senses. He is the ultimate controller. If he sanctions our sight to be able to see, it will happen. We cannot independently use our senses in any way. So just another way that Krishna is establishing this knower, us, and the supreme knower. We're going to see the same distinction in the enjoyer, the Purusha. The living entity will be considered a Purusha. The Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, they're a Purusha. But they're not the independent Purusha. There is a supreme Purusha, enjoyer. And that is Krishna. But when one doesn't understand Krishna to be the supreme enjoyer, then everything breaks apart. Everything falls apart. So when I just know me and even my body, but I forget Krishna, the equation doesn't work. You're missing a critical point. So we'll see the same concept of two knowers, two Purushas coming up later in this chapter. Okay? Just let's finish the next two verses in the next two paragraphs.
The body is called Kshetra, and within it dwells the owner of the body, and the Supreme Lord, who knows both the body and the owner of the body. Therefore, he is called the knower of all fields. The distinction between the fields of activities, the knower activities, and the supreme knower of activities is described as follows. Perfect knowledge of the constitution of the body, the constitution of the individual soul, and the constitution of the supreme soul is known in terms of Vedic literature as jnana. That is the opinion of Krishna, to understand both the soul and the super soul as one, yet distinct, is knowledge a distinct knowledge. One who does not understand the field of activity, the knower of the activity, is not in perfect knowledge. One has to understand the position of Prakriti in Purusha, in Ishvara. One should not confuse the three in their different capacities. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is the field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is the living entity. And above them is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic language. There are three Brahman conceptions. Prakriti is the Brahman field of activities, and the Jiva is also Brahma, and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahma, but he is the factual controller.
Last paragraph.
In this chapter, it will also be explained that out of the two knowers, one is fallible and the other is infallible. One is superior and the other is subordinate. One who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who states here very clearly, I am the knower of the field of activity. One who misunderstands a rope to be a serpent is not in knowledge. There are different kinds of bodies, and there are different owners of the bodies. Because each individual soul has his individual capacity for lording it over material nature, there are different bodies. But the Supreme also is present in them as the controller. The word cha is significant, for it indicates indicates the total number of bodies. That is the opinion of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan. Krishna is the super soul present in each and every body apart from the individual soul. And Krishna explicitly says here that real knowledge is to know that the super soul is the controller of both the field of activities and the finite enjoyer.
Again, Prabhupada makes this so simple for us, right? So knowledge, again, it goes back to knowing the Lord, the living entity, and matter, right? And here we see that it's dangerous when we don't have knowledge. And what is the danger? What analogy do we see that Prabhupada gives us?
Rope and serpent.
How is that dangerous?
It's a distorted knowledge, distorted information.
How is the analogy of the rope and serpent dangerous?
Oh, it's a rope. That was a snake.
Yeah.
I am the body. That way, probably.
So if you see
Oh,
a
I
piece
get
of
it.
rope
I get it.
and you go to grab that rope and it's a serpent, what happens?
Get bit.
Bad. Not good, right? It's dangerous. I remember my mother was telling me once, she grew up in Africa, and she had come down from some attic, and she'd come down and she'd seen what she thought was a rope, and then when she went closer, she saw it moving and she ran. And I always think of her when I hear this analogy that we see in our Shastras. It's also mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam. But the point here is that when we don't have knowledge, it becomes very dangerous for us. So if I don't know that I am not this body and that there's a Supreme Lord, then how does that become a dangerous situation for us? What is the danger of such a lack of knowledge?
Falling into ignorance.
Falling into ignorance. And what will we do? What activities will we do?
Sense gratification.
Huh?
More sinful activity.
When we don't know who is the Purusha, we'll try to be the Purusha, the enjoyer. And to do so, we'll do all kinds of activities that ultimately will result in suffering. What is the result of sinful life? Reactions. Not knowing what is good and what is bad for me leads to suffering. So we see that this knowledge becomes the critical point for us to be able to not mistake a rope for a serpent, not encounter a very dangerous situation. So this is the understanding. So we said that there were some distinctions of the super soul. The super soul is present everywhere, and it is all-knowing. One more difference is presented here by Srila Prabhupada. There's a difference between the soul and the super soul. What is that? One more distinction Prabhupada adds.
Fallible and infallible.
Yes. Which is fallible?
Or
Jiva.
jiva.
Say it. To err is?
Human.
Human. We all make mistakes, right? But Krishna is infallible. He is perfect. And so that is another distinction. We'll see more coming up later in this chapter. But this gives us an overview. So now we have a good foundation to progress in the coming verses, understanding the different knowers, the field, and this what constitutes knowledge. So now Krishna is going to continue and expand upon these themes in the coming verses. Okay? Well, any questions or comments for today's discussion, or anything else related?
I kind of have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if it's... Is there some kind of a natural sort of like means of atonement between the jiva, their karma, and Ishvara if they're not in knowledge of the difference between what we discussed in this chapter? Like for any other person in the world who may not know Krishna or have that, idea in their mind or know that sort of knowledge, that, what is the natural process of that sort of unification of the jiva to the super soul?
Yeah, it's a nice question because...
Like almost like in nature, is it a natural occurrence or is it literally only a cultivation? And is that a direct result of the modes of nature, and...
Yep. So it's an important question, and it's a mode out of compassion because, the natural wonder is, wow, what happens if someone doesn't know this? This
Right.
leads to a very dangerous situation.
Because, you think about it in terms of the supreme super soul as controller of the universe,
Yeah.
but without any kind of conscious minds throughout space,
What
everything just kind of runs into each other and kind of swirls around in chaos. So
Yeah.
how does,
And so a few things to unpack there. The first is that when we say the super soul is the controller, what we understand is that we are still exercising our free will to desire different activities. So the super soul does not control us like robots. When the machine operator is controlling a robot moves exactly according to the will of the operator. Right? There's no separation if it's properly programmed. Right? There's no separation. But when we say Krishna is the supreme controller, he's not like the machine operator. He is hearing all of our desires. And based upon those desires, arranging the facilities for different activities to occur. So his presence in all of our bodies serves to understand what is it that we desire. And according to our desire and our qualification, Krishna arranges in nature for things to occur. So while we on the one hand, we are not the independent doer of anything. On the other hand, Krishna is not accountable for our misbehaviors, because it is our desire that instigates action. So we know I am responsible because it starts from my action. But I also know it occurs by the arrangement of the Lord. So now, to your first part of your question, how does one atone for their activities if one doesn't know this? Well, one, now I'm going to address your third part and then come back to the first part. One cannot, by any material means, understand something transcendental. This is a spiritual topic. Spiritual topics cannot be understood by any material means. So I can study nature and the material world around me to the end, yet it will not bring me to the most basic understanding of spiritual life. So what to do? Spiritual topics. This knowledge must be received from a descending mode. It cannot be acquired through our own analysis, because this material intelligence, even if it's so powerful, it can only take me up to matter. To go beyond matter, I have no means of my own to do so. So now what to do? Well, Krishna is sitting in our heart as Paramatma. Thus he is called Chaitya Guru. When the jiva has a desire to know, has a desire to understand, then the Guru, sitting in the heart of Super Soul, begins to direct and speak to the jiva. And ultimately, bring the jiva to the path of the bona fide spiritual master, like Srila Prabhupada, acquire this knowledge, and begin to change actions to result to perfection of life. So that is in response to the jiva's desire. The super soul is arranging all of this to happen. So the means of atonement is only to come to Krishna consciousness. And one will come to Krishna consciousness when that desire manifests. And what the devotees try to do, acquire the desire to come when the living entity is so lost in their material mundane affairs. The compassionate devotee feels great pain seeing the living entities missing the boat, if you will. And so the devotee will go out and spread and share and speak and somehow try to inspire that jiva to begin to desire, to know. And when one practices devotional service, then one can atone for all past activities. There is no other means, nor is it a random arrangement of nature for some living entities to come to this knowledge and others to not. It is not random. It is all happening under the sanction of the Supreme Lord, who is listening and hearing every one of our desires. And that is why progress in devotional service for all of us, it is strongly based on the intensity of our desire. The more we call out to Krishna, asking for help, to become clear in this knowledge, to understand it, it will happen. I can read this Bhagavad Gita over and over and over again, but if I'm not approaching it with the right spirit of understanding how this knowledge is revealed, I'll know nothing after years and years of study. So that's the way in which the Super Soul interacts with the jiva to bring this knowledge to him or her, and ultimately bring one to the platform of devotional service. Any other questions? Any follow-ups to that?
So it's a very powerful statement that you made, that it's not by random that we have come over and approaching and doing what we are at this point of time. It's really a big fortune, it's a big mercy. Just by chance that we just went to run Bhakti Viksha and then we got inspired. Or
It sometimes feels that way,
it's
right?
like, it's almost, kind of sometimes you feel that, but just by chance that we
Come over.
happen to, right? But it's so natural, but at the same time, the design of Lord, and
And that's how he is the supreme knower, right? So by being the supreme knower, he can arrange anything. He's arranging millions of universes to be floating in the air, and provisions us all the facilities in every living entity, and feeding even the small ants and the big ant, arranging everything. He also can arrange us coming to the path of devotion. Very nice. It's also very comforting to know, right? Krishna's always with us. He's always with us. That's why the devotees never feel no fear.
and also that he's always there with us. So if we're doing anything wrong, so we should be knowing also that he's there, you know. So like he's like an inspector there, you know, in our heart too. So we can't just deceive anybody. We can deceive the world, but we can't deceive Krishna.
See that
Right? We're deceiving ourselves.
the bank
Making
robber in the
ourselves
dead of night may get away with the robbery,
Mm.
but Krishna will always know. So the same. He knows our good, bad.
When they talk about people who try to merge with Brahman, what do they mean by that? What does that mean to try to do that? Is that like does that go into like an Ed Beighton sort of philosophy of
Straight.
formlessness? Of
Yeah.
you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I do. So Prabhupada makes a comment here that one who doesn't know the constitution or the super soul, distinct yet one with the jiva, is misguided. So I can't find the exact statement, but he made a statement here. So what some philosophers will speak about, and there's two aspects of impersonal philosophy. One is not so dangerous, but is not. Oh, there's three levels of supreme understanding. One is understanding the impersonal feature of the Lord. That is like the first level of Paramatma understanding. The Brahman realization. The next level is to understand the super soul, Paramatma. And the final, ultimate stage of realizing the Supreme Lord is Krishna, Bhagavan realization. But they're all three sequential steps of understanding the same thing.
Yeah.
They're not three distinct things. They give the example of...
Like levels of one thing. Kinda
Yeah, like,
tree, yeah.
give the example of if I'm far away in the horizon, I see the city. I have a faint understanding of that city by its skyline.
Right.
As I go closer, and I get to the edge, now I'm seeing that city a little bit more detailed. I can hear, I can smell something. And as I enter the city, now I have complete... All along, I'm getting more and more knowledge of the same. So same thing from Brahman realization to Paramatma realization to Bhagavan. I am perceiving Krishna ultimately in greater and greater degrees. So the Brahman philosophy, the people who want to merge into Brahman, there are some who desire that this idea of merging into the impersonal effulgence is kind of this feeling of liberation, floating in the spiritual sky. And
So just literally kind of being somewhere within that is kind of the idea
the
of...
best way I can liken it to,
It's kind of like being a consciousness without the body.
yes, but there's still consciousness, as he said, and so I liken it to being on a raft in the
Yeah.
middle of a giant lake and just floating,
And just kind of seeing out.
right? Now, what's the problem or the challenge with floating on a, Labor Day is coming up, people will go out to the lakes, land. What is the problem of floating on a raft in the middle of a giant lake?
Oh, just to get stuck and float away. Yeah.
You get stuck. Why would we be concerned about being stuck?
Can't
Huh?
get back.
What do you do there?
What do you do there?
Right. You're
It's
stuck.
pleasurable for some time.
Sometimes.
But after some time, you want some activity. This idea of floating, because the jiva is active, by nature, it has activity as its nature, it wants to engage in some activities. So in the impersonal Brahman liberation, there's no activity. It's simply floating in the spiritual sky. So Srila Prabhupada talks about when one reaches that point, they'll experience some happiness. But ultimately, the absence of activity, engagement, will lead one back down to the material world, or at least there's some activity. So that is the concept. Now, the more dangerous impersonal philosophy is that there's, the philosophy that we are all part of the same Brahman. So Prabhupada says that there's three aspects of Brahman: nature, the Jiva, and Krishna. But Krishna is Para-Brahman, the supreme Brahman. So what some will set that aside and say that when we all liberate, we all merge into God. And so in order for that to happen, right, two people can't merge into each other. It doesn't work. Two people, that never happens. But, a drop of water can merge into the ocean because it's formless. So to facilitate such an idea, they suggest that Krishna has no form, he's ultimately impersonal. And thus it allows one to believe that, wait, I can also merge into God and become part of God. But that obviously is in far defiance of what Krishna himself is establishing throughout the book. So that impersonal philosophy is there out of envy of why does Krishna get to be God? Why can't I be God? And it takes us right back to that same desire to be Purusha. So in this desire to become God, one concocts this very dangerous and bogus philosophy of Krishna's ultimately impersonal. And thus when I liberate, I can emerge into the Supreme. That's just a short synopsis, it's much more detailed, but that's what we hear about merging into Brahman.
So there's a very intricate difference with the concept of thinking of the super soul as when it's referred to as, the source from which all animates, all sustained by, and then all merges with after annihilation. The merging isn't that what you're talking of. The merging is either being reincarnated and transmigrating or going back to the spiritual. Gotcha.
One remains their independent self. There's no merging. That's why Krishna says in the 12th verse of the 2nd chapter, never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you. Nor in the future shall either of us cease to be. So he even says in the future, we'll always remain independent living entities.
Okay.
So just as the fish swimming in a river, the river may merge into the ocean, but the fish, the aquatic, goes from the river into the ocean. It doesn't lose its individuality. So the living entity may go from one realm to the other, but it doesn't lose its individuality. It remains independent. So yes, the river may merge into the ocean, but the aquatic species of life do not. They retain their individuality. So we retain our individuality no matter where we are, material world or spiritual world.
That's what goes into all those other questions I asked the other day, and I'll ask you another time about the interdimensions and things. But that's
entirety, it's clear as day. Right? Krishna says so many different areas. He says, I am the supreme truth. He's going to say in chapter 15, I am Purushottama, the supreme person in chapter 11. Right? This is my eternal form, by which not many know. So he's giving over and over again. But still, people aren't denying.
Okay, one last quick question. Mosquitoes are biting.
Yes.
We know about Sukdev Goswami, how he was impersonal in the beginning, but with the mercy of Vyasadeva, he got to the aspect of devotional service. We know about the 4 Kumaras, right? The same thing, impersonal in the beginning, but with the fact of the aroma of the tulsi leaves, they are attracted to the lotus feet of Krishna. So I'm just thinking about the impersonalists who might be there in this material world. So isn't it a possibility that if they get in contact with a pure devotee, that things might change? But then why we say in Krishna consciousness that, when we hear Mahavadis, we should, but there might be like the pure devotees might be able to actually turn them over? So
Yeah,
we don't lose hope, kind of thing, on them.
So when we speak about, Shukadeva Goswami and the four Kumaras, their impersonalism was again at this Brahman realization platform. It wasn't in denial of Krishna as the Supreme Lord, it was in not understanding.
Okay.
So it's one thing to not have complete knowledge that there's a form of the Lord. There's another thing to deny the existence of the Lord. So now I hear it and I deny it. Right? So why the Mayavadi philosophy is so offensive is because they have taken all this knowledge, all this Shastra, and refuted it, contorted it, twisted it, right? And made it into something unpalatable. So that is a danger. Whereas if one only knows of Krishna as his impersonal feature, and through association can come to know the higher levels of knowledge, now one can progress to very beautiful places, right? So there's two different types, the progressive and one who is actually denying. But we know the pure devotee can even transform, and someone like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
Yeah.
listened 7 days,
Yeah.
to all stuff, and made him a great acharya. Now, Prabhupada warns us that unless you are very potent in your knowledge in Shastra and very expert, be careful. Because you can get dragged in, right? Just like if somebody is swimming in the ocean and they are drowning, unless you are an expert swimmer, you cannot jump in the ocean and save them. But if you are an expert swimmer, then of course you can go and try. But if you're not, you're both going to drown. Right? So that is where that idea comes. But let us draw distinctions between the impersonalists. The impersonalists who are on the progressive stage of understanding Bhagavan, that's one thing. And there's great opportunity. And you mentioned 2 very beautiful examples. But then there are the impersonalists who are claiming to have full knowledge of Vedanta, who claim to be the authority of Vedanta, and say that Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, but that's because he is forced to assume a form by the influence of Maya when he descends. Now that is very offensive, and the consequence of those offenses is great. Okay, so 2 distinct. We cannot lump all impersonal philosophy into one bucket. We have to understand who is the innocent, progressive, learning more and more, and who is actually the claimer of knowledge incorrectly and denying the existence of it. So those are the 2 that we should say. So the innocent, yeah, we can try to explain more and more and more. To the Mayavadis, better to keep this.
Thank you, Prabhuji. I mean, this distinction I did not know. So these are the 2 different categories of impersonalists.
Yeah.
I now understand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhuji, so much.
Okay. Yeah. So we chant? Too late? Yeah, report. Shila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava.